Anything said on this show represents opinions only and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice. Welcome to Finances the Other F Word, a podcast about the money behind current events where we do the research so you won't have to. Here is your host, Mello, certified financial planner and author of Finances the Other F Word. Catch Mello live on the Station Head app Wednesday mornings at 6 a.m. Pacific Time via the handle @MomentOfMetal. Listener discretion is advised.
Okay, so that cut off the song. Just so you guys know, that was not me. I'm watching the bar, and I'm like, are you fucking serious? You're not even going to go to the end of the song? And it was like, no, bitch, I sure the fuck ain't. So, okay then. I guess that's how it be sometimes. Good morning, Dream. How are you doing? Metal, what's up? X, how you doing? So, today, first of all, I'm seeing Pantera Friday night. So that's the reason, well, half of Pantera. That's the reason why wanted to play a little bit of Pantera today. And on this show, today, I'm trying to figure out if it's really the boomers' fault, right? And I have been responsible for blaming the boomers pretty hard, hating on the boomers pretty hard. I've done that, I don't know, last couple years, especially with Trump getting a second term. I've been really hating on the boomers. And I thought, man, is it really the boomers' fault? Like, I mean, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to make a persuasive point either way. But what I'm doing is I'm talking about key legislation that has been put into place and what generation basically was to blame for it and how it affected the 99% of us. And with my shows, I try to find topics that I can explore as best as possible and try to get as many sides to the story and as much evidence and proof as I can get without it, while fighting my confirmation bias, which, we've all know that we have, and I am no exception by that. And lately I've been having this real problem where, I have clients that are different political affiliations, and they'll say things that I'm like, that doesn't even sound right. Shit that they saw on the news, on these 24-hour news cycles. And two of the most recent examples was that the Biden administration put shrimp on treadmills, and that they wasted, I don't even know, whatever exaggerated figure they had in their brain. And so if you Google shrimp on treadmills, a picture comes up of a shrimp on an underwater treadmill. It's actually adorable. However, if you read it, they were studying the effects of pollution and climate change and a certain bacteria on sea life. And of course, we eat the sea life, right? And so that's where that came from, and it was a very small part of the experiment. Another one I got recently is, the Biden administration. You guys, I fucking can't even say it with a straight face, because like literally, if you do a fucking Google search for 0.5 seconds, you'll find that this shit is bullshit. So the other thing I heard from a client was Biden paid for mice to be transgender, right? And so I don't know what it is about MAGA people, but if you say the word transgender, like they lose their mind, like they fucking can't handle it. I don't know, they spin out, right? And I'm like, what? That doesn't make sense. So I Googled it, and it's a hoax. It's a hoax, and it's also true at the same time, but not in the context. So this is why I tell you guys context is important, and I'm leading up to the episode today while I'm explaining about these examples. So if you look up transgender mice or something of that nature, that's what I Googled. And it said that this was a hoax, that there was this rumor going around that the Biden administration, thus Democrats, right, had paid, and I'm not saying Democrats don't pay for stupid shit, right? I mean, yes, absolutely 100%. Republicans too, right? Everybody's paying for stupid shit. There's too much going on in the government. We are literally driving a comedy of errors at this point, and you're going to find out how deep it goes with this episode. It's fucking ridiculous. So what it was they were trying to research the effects of hormones on transgender people, or hormones on, I can't remember what it was, but they were trying to test hormones. And what they used was a mouse model. And so from that came this belief, or this political stumping post, that there was that the Biden administration had spent all this money on making mice transgender. And if you listen to that, much like Pizzagate, right? Like when they were like, oh, the Democrats have a pizza place where in the basement they do child sex trafficking. Like, come on. I mean, even if you said Republicans did that, none of that makes sense to me, right? And so when I do my shows, I try to think of something that is a long-held belief, whether it's my mic is tripping this morning, whether it's something that is legitimate, or if it's just something that we believe as a true thing. And then I try to research it as best as I can, to try to figure out, are my beliefs real or not real? And as a result of that, and doing the show and Finance is the Other F Word, I have went and changed my mind on multiple issues, like the death penalty, which I've always been 100% for the death penalty. However, the death penalty costs way more money than just putting somebody in prison for life. And so, whether you feel eye for an eye, or if you think life imprisonment is worse than death or whatever, I mean, that's not really the point I'm making in this. And I did a whole episode on it. And I also did an episode here where I revisited it, and you can research that for yourself. But it's cheaper to keep somebody in prison for life than give them the death penalty. Where in my brain, I was like, okay, if you killed somebody, just, fry them, assuming they're guilty for real, fry them and let's get on with it. And I know that sounds callous, but that's how I thought before, until I did the research. And now from a fiscal standpoint, I'm like, death penalty doesn't make sense. And so this show is one of those shows. And, I spend so much time looking at the boomer generation in jealousy and envy both, of the amount of wealth that the generation has. And especially when I look around with my new clients coming up, my millennial clients, my, very, very oldest Gen Zs, and understanding, the more research I do, understanding exactly how fucked up and layered our economy is in the United States. And I was like, okay, are boomers really to blame, right? Like, did they really fuck us? Or are we just hating on them? And I was actually going to open this show with In the Living Years by Mike and the Mechanics, which is a great song, but also very depressing. But the reason why I was going to do it is because the very first lyric of that song is, every generation blames the one before, and all of their frustrations come beating on our door. And so that's just very poignant. And I think that a lot of the what's going on right now is the desire to blame somebody. And we got to make sure that those blaming of people doesn't turn into scapegoating. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I found myself with the boomer generation, me just having this almost irrational anger at just assuming that every boomer is against younger generations, and that they believe that shrimp on underwater treadmills. If you're just joining me, you'd have to listen at the top of the hour to get that explained. But if this belief of transgender mice and underwater, shrimp on underwater treadmills, that you could literally easily discredit within a 0.5 second Google search. But it seems like that's a stretch too far. And so I hope when you listen to my show, you know that I'm doing the best research I can possibly for me and for you, fighting my confirmation bias all the way. So are boomers really to blame? So there's a couple key legislation that has hindered the up and coming generations that has been passed recently since like the late 1970s and on to the, 2010. And there's more, no doubt, coming down the pipe. And what I found is that the boomers are not as to blame as we think. However, they have exacerbated the situation, as has some of the Xers. Okay. And so far, the only generation that's gotten in there and hasn't really tried to fuck things up yet are millennials. But of course, there's a lot of, you can argue there's, millennials voting against their best interest and, all that kind of stuff. And so Graham says boomers pull ladder up quietly. Well, we're going to find out right now, yes and no. And we're going to get into the idiosyncrasies of it. And I did my best. Is there going to be things I missed? Yes, absolutely. Is there going to be things that, you could argue with me on? Yeah, absolutely. But I'm doing the best I can. So let's start way back in 1978. This is when I would be like 4 years old. Okay. This actually came out of the state of California, but it set the stage for for what would be like the playbook of every state going forward. And so this was Prop 13. And what this did was the state of California passed a law that for their taxable rates on their houses, that it was purchase price capped at only a 2% addition every year. So depending on the state you're in, they're all different. I have a list of states in here. I'm not going to go through it because I don't think half the people care. But this one law from 1978 spurred all of these other laws in states that have similar caps. Texas has a 10% cap. I think Florida has a 3, I'm doing it by memory, 3 or 5% cap. Oregon has, I think, like a, up to a 3 or 5% cap. I can't remember now, but I have a list of them. If you want to know, I will find it in my notes and I will tell you. But what that did is a lot of things. Number one, it hindered the tax base. Okay, so like if you guys have ever looked at your property and it said, oh, this is the value and then this is what it's taxed at, you know what I'm saying? The difference, the discrepancy between market value and the taxable amount is a huge discrepancy? Both. It's all of those things that I just said. Like take those two words, combine them, and that's what I'm talking about. And so what happened is that hindered the tax base, because if I bought my home and now it's worth more than I paid for it, but I'm still getting taxed on the purchase price plus, and I didn't even actually check on Nevada, whatever their percentage increase is, right? So that's one thing. Also, for generations coming up behind us who are trying to buy a house, they are going to get assessed at market value. So if I buy my house at $250,000, I hold it for a number of years, and then in 20 years, 10 years later or whatever, I sell it at $500,000. The younger generations, presumably they're the younger generations coming in and buying my home, not only are they stuck buying $500,000 house, their tax basis has now got reassessed and revalued at $500,000, which means that has added to their payment. So not only are they paying a premium for the house because of the equity that's been built up in the house, which was protected by legislation, and I'll tell you who passed it, okay? Now they come in and they have to pay higher taxes because it's reset at market value. And so the thing is that this ended up doing so many different things. It was like this domino effect. So what we saw a lot of older people locking in. They're just staying put. They're not moving out. They're not moving out of their house because they have a very low tax basis. If they've managed to pay the house out to zero, their taxes are manageable. And for them to go and, try to buy something new or downsize, which is what we typically used to see with the older people, is they would sell their house, they would downsize. They have less incentive to do that. And that was actually passed by pre-boomers. That was the silent and the great generation. So we have the silent / great generation. World War II, they defeated Hitler, right? That's why they're called the great generation. Then they came back and they had a whole bunch of babies, which are the boomers. And then the boomers, some of the boomers had Xers like me, and then some of the boomers had millennials. And then away we go, right? So this was actually put in place by the silent and the great generation. This was pre-boomer that had nothing to do with pre-boomer. However, what we saw is that we saw that boomers expanded this where they allowed a exclusion if it is a primary residence, okay, and you are a married couple, you get a $500,000 exclusion. If you are a single person like myself, you get a $250,000 exclusion and a $500,000 exclusion. Excuse me, let me make sure that I'm making that perfectly clear. When you sell your home, the boomers built that into the system as well. And what that does is that compounds the lack of taxation, which affects the schools and the local areas, which affects all of the local communities. And on top of that, because the longtime homeowners are so entrenched in the area, they can also try to stop any other zoning that could be a potential to build extra homes. But you know what is not in shortage? Apartments that are owned by private equity firms. And if you've been following my show or you subscribe to the podcast, I talked all about private equity, and you know why that's fucking dangerous, okay? So it was something that was started not by boomers, but it was exacerbated by boomers, but it was something that was already put in place. And at the time, when we're looking at the changes that were made in our government that affect our wallets now, our 99%, us, right? There's all these things that stack on top of each other that the constituents at that age and date and time vote in for themselves because they think that it's a great way to protect themselves. But what they don't understand is that we get generation after generation after generation removed from this, and then we start seeing economic slowdowns. We start seeing the middle class getting suppressed and crushed, and we start seeing tax revenues drop, and all these things are connected. This is what I try to show in all of my shows. And so the thing is that it also means tighter supplies and higher prices. And we've seen over the decades, we've seen that sorry, my phone just beeped and it distracted me for a second. Let me put it, I can't believe it's not on sleep. Sorry, guys. What the fuck, Mel? Okay, now we're done. Because it's very hard for me to get my train of thought back. And so, fuck. And so what we see that there are higher prices, and we've seen over the decades, the equity that has built up in houses is just crazy. It's crazy than what we normally saw. However, and then you take that and you compound that with 2008, where interest rates were so low. And you take people like me, right, who bought this house under a screaming interest rate, and I get realtors coming to the door all the time. Hey, you want to sell your house? No, I don't. Fuck off. Like, I'm not selling my house. My interest rate is stupid low. Eat shit. Like, kick rocks. Like, there's no way I'm going to sell. And to be fair, as an Xer, when I do get ready to sell my home, am I going to go, okay, I bought it for X and I'm only going to sell it, a little bit over? No, of course I'm not. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to get as much as I can on the open market. And this is where it's hard to look at yourself and realize that you're part of the system. Even though you spend all of your time rebelling and being pissed off at the system, you are part of it. And I think that this is what happened in some aspect with the boomers, is that they got caught up. They hit at a perfect time, you guys. This is why they were able to amass so much wealth. But the arrogance about it, I think, is what pisses us off, is the fact that, oh, I worked hard. All you need to do is work hard too. Fuck off. It doesn't work like that. Look at data, or pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Again, fuck off. Look at the data. It doesn't work like that. But they came online in a situation where we were after the war. Everybody was coming back. Everybody was buying stuff. The economy was kicking ass. And then what they had was their parents, the silent generation, putting in these different pieces of legislature in effect that ended up then giving them the ability to have gains that were protected in houses that were very affordable from the silent and great generation that were then passed on down to the boomers who, because what we see is for the House of Representatives, you have to be 25 years old. For the Senate, you have to be 30, and to run for president, you have to be 35. And so we usually see the influx of the newest generations coming in through the House and then eventually going to the Senate and then eventually moving on. And this is why we find that the Senate is typically more conservative than the House. And it's very hard to start moving the needle when there's this stuttered, and I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing. I'm just telling you this is just the basics of moving through our congressional system. And if you compound that with data that regardless of the generation, the youngest generations typically do not vote. And either they don't vote because they don't understand, they don't think it's relevant, but their lack of voting, this happened with the boomers, their lack of voting in their younger years allows a lot of this shit to get in place. Xers were responsible for it too, millennials, same. And this is how legislation gets put in place, and then it just becomes a comedy of errors, like with what Clinton did when he signed in, when he made it so the CEOs had to be paid based on the performance of the companies, which ended up tying their salaries to stock performance versus an actual salary. He was trying to do something good, but he literally, with that act, he fucked he created this massive chasm between the C-suite executives and the lowest and the just rank and file workers. That was Clinton did that, trying to make the system better. And then here we are. And of course, we're never going to go back now because the C-suite executives, they have absolutely no incentive. And then what we have on top of that, as you'll see here in a moment, is we have more legislation that was put in place by either a boomer, silent generation coalition or a predominantly silent, AKA great generation, predominant House and Senate and presidency, all three cabinets, and we're now feeling the effects of all the shit rolling downhill. And so this is what I was trying to uncover. And so the taxation on the homes. Now walk with me through this. Let's assume that you are marked to market. This is what they call it in my world, okay? Your assets are marked to market, meaning that, if you buy a house at $200,000, but now it's worth $500,000, that's marking to market, okay? If your real estate taxes were based on a home of $500,000, if you had gotten the home paid off, at some point, your taxes might become too expensive. If you have a runaway equity in your home, your taxes are too expensive for you to pay. And what does that cause you to do? It causes you to sell and it causes you to downsize, which allows more supply to come on the market, which will drop home prices, because I covered in one of my old episodes, my previous episodes, that since the 1960s, our housing supply has not been replenished to what we need to maintain suitable housing for everybody. Okay, so we've seen a rise in homeless people. As a result of that, we've seen a massive rise in private equity. We've seen rents go up. And this happens from all these little tiny stabs, right? It's like death by 10,000 paper cuts, okay? So that was one of them. I'm going to go into the next one, and then I'm going to play a song because I didn't realize that this was as long-winded as it is. So my apologies for that. So basically from Prop 13, which was pre-boomer, we see that a lot of these tax protections get locked in. And then with Prop, I think it was... no, Prop 15 failed. It was in 97. I think it was some type of, so I'll get to it here in a second. I think it was in 1997. That's when they came up with the creation of, you should be able to shelter some of your gains from, XYZ selling of a home. And I will tell you, I don't want to pay extra taxes, but if by me paying extra taxes would allow the imbalance of the younger generations to be able to participate more in our economy, that I know from basic economics is healthier overall. So yes, I would do it. I would cuss the whole time, but I would absolutely fucking do it. And I don't even have kids. And I'd hope that you do it for your children too. So 1981, all right, here we go. This is under Reagan. This is also pre-boomer. This is also pre-boomer. So the boomers were very young during this time. Those who could vote were not voting. And that means that the House and the Senate and the presidency were all controlled by silent great generation people. And what they did was this was the first big tax cuts. This is the first part of the Reagan tax cuts, where they took the highest tax rate from 70% down to 50%. Now, we've seen this trend continue ever since 1981 when Reagan started it. And for those of you who have any studying of Reagan, he was the first one with, trickle down economics, and the people at the top give them all the money and it'll trickle down to the people below, which we know is fucking bullshit. And I think it's ironic that at the time that working people thought a Hollywood actor with millions of dollars would be able to serve their best interest. And now we're looking at working class people voting in a billionaire who was born into money, who was the recipient of a lot of these silent and great generation things, to represent them too. It's just like history just keeps repeating itself. So the Reagan tax cuts, they took the top tax bracket from 70 to 50. They also created the accelerated depreciation. So for those my business owners out there, you have the option to do accelerated depreciation, which gives you a bigger tax write-off now. I understand it, but I'm not a CPA, so I just give it to my CPA, and then she does whatever she does, and I go, okay, cool, thank you, and I just believe her, right? So whether it's straight line depreciation, which it used to be in the past, but now you can do accelerated depreciation. They also introduced the first reduction in capital gains, which has now snowballed and now become canon, that if you have capital gains, you don't have to pay as much as somebody who teaches your kids or takes care of you in the hospital or lays floor for a living, right? And this was such a big deal because this was the first shift away from we think you have more value if you own stuff already than if you work for a living. And we start to see the first cracks in the tax system where it is going to benefit owners. Now, we saw that in 1978, we saw the rollout with Prop 13 coming out of California. Then it started getting picked up by all of the other states. That was the first nail in the coffin of if you own something, you're going to be better off. Then we have these tax cuts come through, and they end up taking it the highest bracket from 70 to 50, accelerated depreciation. We see the first introduction of capital gains, which has not changed. And we start seeing bracket indexing, where we have, I've explained how taxes work before, but we have the stair step, right? And again, all of this is favoring older generations that have money already or have assets already. And this was put into place by the great, AKA the silent generation. So this had nothing to do with boomers. But what I think we see with the boomer generation is that they are the recipients of all of this goodwill. And then what has happened is that they believe that it's because they are somehow smarter or they've worked harder, therefore they deserve it. And then I think that arrogance is what is so infuriating, especially when I have people telling me that Biden is paying for shrimp walking on underwater treadmills, when if you just took a goddamn second, excuse my language, you could very easily debunk yourself. But the fact that they choose not to and then have the arrogance that they somehow worked for everything they got without understanding everything that came before them to set them up for success, I think that's the reason why it's so easy to hate on boomers. Okay? So that's what we're feeling right now. So let me play a quick song, and then we're going to get into the next couple ones. I should be probably only going about an hour and 15 minutes today. So anyway, what am I playing? Oh yeah, here we go. This is some Meshuggah. All right, so that didn't cut off like the Pantera song. All right, so Chad is cracking me up as always. Okay, so let's get into some other stuff. This happened that weakened our unions. Now, let me first of all go on record. If you've listened to my show, I don't know, this is 400 and how many podcast episodes I have? I want to say 434 at this point or some ridiculous shit. I'm on season 10. And if you've listened to my show throughout, if you've been like there from the beginning, I have told you multiple times I am not a fan of unions, right? I have said that so many times because I have said that the perception is that the unions protect you from the man, but the unions are the man, which I still do stand by that. However, this is where I think that, you know, I hope that the people who listen to my show are obviously open to as much critical thinking as I can present them, and then they can, you know, go do their own stuff. But as I read more about unions, I go, you know what? We really need stronger unions in this country. And I've talked about the Men Who Built America, which was an A&E series, and how pivotal the unions were, and how a lot of the reasons why America was great back in the day was because we had strong ass fucking unions. So that being said, I was like, I kind of want to renege on that just a little bit. So let's talk about PATCO. All right. And so this was something that happened again under the Reagan administration. And in August 3rd of 1981, all right, the Federal Air Traffic Controllers Union, PATCO, decided that they were going to go on strike. And I don't know what they were striking for. I'm sure it was, you know, stressful conditions, all the same shit that we're striking for. And Reagan, a Republican who was notoriously anti-union, was in office, and they said, we're going to give you 48 hours to return to work. And they didn't. And so what happened is the federal government, let me finish this thought, and let me go back to another show that I did. So the federal government said, okay, fine, you're all fucking fired. And they fired over 11,000 air traffic controllers and imposed a lifetime federal rehire ban on them. So, and this was later lifted by Clinton. So they literally said, oh, you want to strike? Okay, fuck you. We're going to fire all of you, and we're going to make it so you can't be rehired ever in your life. And once that happened, that was such a massive blow to unions that we see that from that point on, that the enrollment in union membership started going down. We started seeing that the powers of the union started getting dissolved, slowly but surely started getting ticked away at. We saw that work stoppages fell to the lowest historical levels. And that was before boomers. So we have boomers coming in to a situation where the unions are considerably weakened, and that happened before their time. That was the silent generation. That was the great generation. That was under Reagan. That was under my grandparents' time. And, you know, my grandparents, I was talking to my bestie yesterday in Tennessee, and I told her, you know, I'm glad both my grandparents are dead, because I don't think we would be able to talk anymore, because I 100% know they'd be MAGA. I'd 100% know they'd be Trump. And, you know, they were both blue collar workers who distrusted rich people and, you know, thought that rich people only screwed the little guy. And then they supported a president that weakened unions. It's the craziest shit to me. Like, I don't understand it. But I guess, you know, we all have our things, right? And so this was one of the very biggest powering, power shifts from the unions into individual companies. And that had nothing to do with boomers. That was pre-boomer. And of course, then it was undid by a boomer in 1993 when Clinton, you know, canceled the rehiring. The lifetime ban on the rehiring. All right. So then we move to 1997. So this is what I had alluded to before we went into the Meshuggah song. This is where we see that it introduced the long-term capital gains rate of 20%. So remember that we had the first Reagan tax reforms that came through. So we had this is what we had. We had the 1978 beginning of what some people in the articles I've read were deeming the tax revolt, where people said, hey, you're taxing us too much on our houses. Of course, California would start it. And it was adopted by, in some way, shape, or form, most of the 50 states. Then from that, you compound that, you add on Reagan, who said, okay, we're going to introduce this capital gains rate, and we're going to start slowly shifting the power to owners, thus shifting the power to the 1% over the 99%. And then you have the Tax Relief Act of 1997, which came in under a predominantly silent generation and boomer mix, because now we have the boomers entering Congress. We have the boomers representing a bigger point of the power, the voting base. We saw that the Roth IRA was created. We saw that this is where the home sale exclusion comes in. That was the $250,000 for a single person and $500,000 for a married filing joint person couple on a primary home, as long as you have lived in it or used it for the last 2 of 5 years. We also saw an expansion under the boomers of the fact that you can carry forward your house exclusion. So it used to be, the way the tax code was written is that if I had a home as a single person and I had $200,000 in equity, if I turned around and bought another home, I was able to roll that exclusion into that new home for tax purposes. But then what they started doing is that under the boomers, they made this period, like forever, right? So if I sell my house right now, then there's $250,000 in equity I get to write off. Now, the younger generations are still fucked, because they're coming into a system where they're buying at market prices. Their tax basis is going to be reset at market prices. Right now, currently, as the Fed is, with interest rates, they're going to be paying about between 6 and 8% on mortgage rates, which, by the way, in the 80s, that was like 13%. So just let's put a pin in that, right? And then they're coming into a system where they're trying to buy a home. And I had put up a TikTok video about, the American dream used to be buying a home, and that it's out of reach for a lot of people. And there's a lot of people that don't want to own a home, and they'd rather travel, or they'd rather, do whatever they want to do. And I got so many hate comments from people, saying, oh, I can't believe that you would tell people not to own a home. This is so important. And I'm like, I never said not to own a home. What I'm saying is that it's unrealistic for us to put expectations from silent and great generations, and then from the beneficiaries of all the shit that the silent and the great generation put in place for them, the boomers, to toe this line that somehow if you do not own a home, you are worth less. But if you look at the data, if you look at the way equity changes, if you look at all of these legislation I'm going through right now, all of this stuff that was put in from decades ago and generations ago that are now rolling downhill to the Xers, to the millennials, to Gen Z, Alpha, and Beta, you would understand that comment is fucking ludicrous. And I got so much hate for it. But we do know that the reason why we have almost priced so many of not almost, we are pricing out a lot of the younger generation is because of things like this that are giving the benefit to the older generations. And so we also had the $500 tax child credit, which has, since increased and everything from there. So, and I had another thing I wanted to say on this, and it's fucking gone, and it will come back. So I'll probably double back here in a second. So let's talk about 1999. This is full boomer, right? We're in full boomer swing now, right? Boomer is the biggest voting bloc. Boomer is running the economy. They're buying things. They're in that age bracket where they're consuming. They're buying things. They're voting. They're representing Congress. I think at this time for the 106th Congress, the House was about 53.4% in age. The Senate was 59. And so we saw, in the Senate, the remaining of the silent and the greatest generation holding on to their seats because they're incumbents. They stay fucking forever, which I think we need term limits. That's another story. And then we see boomers coming, and it's a silent boomer majority. And what they did was with the Graham-Lee-Bailey Act, Gramm-Leach-Bailey Act is that they allowed companies to create, I'm talking about financial institutions, to create financial holding companies that allowed them to own securities and insurance affiliates. Okay? Now, banks used to be banks, right? They did FDIC insured shit. They gave loans. That's what the fuck they did. All right. They didn't have, insurance branches. They didn't have any of that shit. You went to an insurance company for insurance. You went to a bank to fucking bank. That's what happened. But in 1999, under a boomer/silent generation Congress, they said, hey, financial institutions, go ahead and create a holding company, and then you can just buy as much financial stuff as possible, which started being the peak of cross-selling. So now let me take you to Wells Fargo and the class action lawsuit against Wells Fargo because they were fucking their clients. I've talked about this. I think the third episode I ever did on Finances the Other F Word was talking about being an employee at Wells Fargo during that time and how people gamed the system and how I reported them and my other coworkers reported them and nothing got happened and nothing got changed. Nobody got fired. Nothing happened. And it took away from like, hey, open a checking or savings account and let's move on to, okay, now, oh, do you need life insurance? Do you need house insurance? Do you need car insurance? Oh, okay, you can also do investments. And this act is what allowed Wells Fargo and Bank of America and Citibank to have, Wells Fargo Investments, LLC, and Wells Fargo Bank, FDIC insured, right? And even though this was not the cause of the 2008 crash, it was a factor of the 2008 crash, because what happened is that now you have regulation that is typically set for insurance companies, and you have regulations that are typically set for banks, and you have regulations that are typically with FINRA and the SEC for investments. And now you've allowed them to be under one big roof. And so what happens is the regulations get muddled. And so things like Lehman Brothers, things like AIG, they start getting lost in the muck. And then it exacerbates a situation like 2008 where it almost wiped us completely out. And it was because of this act in 1999. And this was boomers. Okay, boomers in silent generation, but we see boomers coming in. So again, there's some things that, we can blame boomers for, and there's some things we cannot blame boomers for. And so then we saw Dodd-Frank come in 2010. This was during Obama's presidency. This was after the TARP bailout, and Dodd-Frank came in, and it was really strict. And then it has been dismantled. Dodd-Frank has been dismantled by administration since then. But the one thing that Dodd-Frank did not do is it did not reinstate the Glass-Steagall separation, which is what the 1999 Gramm-Leach-Bailey, I can't say the last name, whatever fucking act, what it undid. So the Glass-Steagall Act was the one who originally said, hey, no, you're a fucking bank. That's what the fuck you do. You stay over in your corner. Insurance companies, you stay over there. So even though the Dodd-Frank Act came in and it reprised everything, like it tried to refresh it and try to do it, it never went back to where it is. And so what we continue to see is because of this act that was passed in 1999 by boomers, in silent generation, we see that the financial institutions continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you remember in 2008, that was the big thing. Oh, they're too big to fail, right? And so we see this shit of just rolling downhill that we seem to not be able to fix. Okay, so let me play this is my last song, and I'm going to start wrapping up here. But what we've been doing on this episode, we've been talking about, are boomers really to blame? You know what I mean? As far as like, there's been a lot of boomer hate. I've been part of it. And is it based in fact? All right. And then there's some other things that I want to just touch on very quickly that I'll be honest with you, I did not go super, super deep into, but I want to talk about those topics and, talk about what generations put what in, because a lot of well, you know what? I'm going to play a song. I'll be back and I'm going to gather my thoughts. and just cuts just like that. Doesn't even do the nice fade out or whatever. So we are coming into the home stretch of looking at some key pieces of legislation that has affected the extra generation, millennials, Z, alpha, beta, or that will continue to affect us unless legislation changes. And my hope has always been that the millennial generation will start becoming a bigger share of Congress, and maybe they will start turning the tide. But if history is any indication, they're not. Because as I do more and more research and I see how this building block turned into this piece of legislation, which turned into this rule and that rule, it seems to just constantly favor the richest Americans, the 1% of Americans. And, you know, I want to be hopeful that the millennials will change things, but you know, I have to believe that the silent and the great generation who came through war, who came through, I mean, so you have to put this in a context of time, okay? So the silent and great generation, they, you know, they were not born during like the big, you know, Rockefellers and Carnegie and Ford and Vanderbilt and all of the people that, if you've ever watched the series The Men Who Built America on A&E, I have it on DVD. It's fucking amazing. Historically, it talks all about how a lot of what we see in our financial situation now came from that period of time, and it came from people striking, and began the rise of unions. And we see us go into this point, and then we start seeing, and again, I have been very open on this show that I'm not a fan of unions, but now I'm like, we really need them, because what we've seen is that productivity has productivity has included to rise, included to rise. What the fuck am I? Oh my God. Okay, let me start the fuck over. Productivity has continued to increase. Jesus, there's the word. All right, has continued to increase, but wages have not. Now, it used to be that productivity and wages were in tandem, right? So as productivity increased, it was better for the company, it was better for the workers' pocketbooks. But since the 70s, we've seen that that's not the case. We've seen that with runaway productivity and stagnated wages. And when you start really dissecting and you can trace back to, okay, this started with, you know, Carnegie, right? And this is how it came through, and this is how this generation of people who ended up becoming the survivors of, or the beneficiary of these things, now think a certain way. So I have a friend, and he said, tough people create good times who create, what was it? This is really important. Let me make sure I say it right. So tough times create tough people who create good times, who create weak people who create tough times, who create tough people who create good times, and around we go. And so you can see this financial breath that's moving from generation to generation. And that was kind of at the heart of me trying to figure out if boomers were really to blame. So now let's look at the Bush tax cuts. Now, for those of you who were not in the financial world during the Bush tax cuts, I was. And basically we had, this was, of course, you know, building off of the Reagan tax cuts. And so what this did was this lowered income tax rates, and added the 10% bracket for the you know, you could say lowest income Americans, but really it depends on how you look at that coin. Was that really a benefit to the 10%, or to the people who would be affected by that 10% tax bracket? Yes and no, but we're not going to explore that today. It began the estate tax phase out. This is very important, okay? Because one of the things I haven't talked about here, but I have touched on multiple times in my show before, is the federal estate tax and some estate tax exclusions. So there is, and I don't know what it is, somebody can Google it for me if they're so inclined, or I could actually Google it, but there is a federal estate tax exclusion. Let me see, I'm going to see what it is right now. what that means is that means for people, and of course I can't find it right now. I got a lot of advertisement for investments popping up, so fuck it. But for the wealthiest Americans, what it does is it excludes a large chunk of their estate. Now, when we're talking about billionaires, it's really a drop in the bucket for them. It's not going to help them, but they have a lot of access to other tax avoidance strategies that they can employ. But the thing is that it started allowing the federal government to get less of your estate, which sounds like a win. But as we've talked about on my show so many times, that we have done nothing but increase the deficit. And with the 2017 Trump administration taxes that are now made permanent, we have just added an additional $2 trillion to our debt, which we are already in debt more than we can produce, which might be a way a household might live, but it's not a good way to actually run a government. And the things that are being proposed are just going to amplify that, which is going to continue to roll downhill to your children and your grandchildren and your grandchildren's children, because a lot of these legislation practices were put in place by the silent generation that is now rolling downhill to their kids 3 generations removed, which is the Xers, millennials, and so on. All right. So we see that we have the introduction of the 10% tax bracket, and we see that we have taxes being cut on dividends. Now, remember when I told you earlier in the show that in 1981, one of the Reagan tax cuts was the first creation of the long-term capital gains rate. And that started benefiting the ownership of the 1%. And for those of you who are listening to me, if this is a little confusing, if this is a little muddled for you, don't get discouraged. Don't get frustrated. Keep listening, because the terms will start falling into place, the way that things build on top of each other, and you are going to start really understanding how money is working, how it's affecting you and your family. And so don't get turned off or, or intimidated by the language. It's just vocabulary. You can learn it too. Just stick with me, okay? So we had the introduction of the Reagan tax cuts, which introduced the capital gains rate, which benefits the wealthiest Americans, the 1%, for ownership of stocks and different other qualifying assets, which never went away. Never went away. Here we are in 2025, never went away. But then on top of that, what we see is Bush come in and say, hey, also dividends. Yeah, we're going to cut the taxes on dividends as well. And so what we have now is, as a result of that, you can own a stock, and let's say that the stock shares in their profits with you, and they pay you a dividend. That's what a dividend is when you own a stock, is the company is saying, hey, we had a good year. Hey, take some extra cash for each share that you own. The Bush tax cuts stepped in, and this is the Bush tax cuts. This was, I believe, this was the second Bush. This was right around the fiscal cliff that we had happened. The Bush tax cuts started to expire, so the fiscal cliff was, I think, in like 2013-ish, and the Bush tax cuts were a big part of it because it had expired. And so Bush comes in, second Bush, and he says, 2 Bushes, and he comes in and he says, you know what, now we're going to make it less tax you pay on dividends, which you only get paid dividends if you own something, which further tilts the taxes to favor the 1% richest Americans. And we keep rolling downhill. And this was a boomer-backed initiative. Okay? The Senate still had some silent and great generation people holding on. So the Senate was a mix of boomer and silent generation. The House was heavy majority boomers. So boomers did vote this in, thus tilting further the scale for people who own stock. Now, let's back up. Now, I want to weave this thread through time. You had people that we come off World War II, they start having babies. We have the boomer generation. We start having people owning more stock. This is where we get the introduction of the stock certificates. And then we have capital gains rates starting to come online. Then we start having preferential treatment for people who are passing down stocks from one generation to another generation, which means that the people who had in the 30s and 40s and 50s continue to have in the 2025s. because this was in place and they've just passed it and passed it and passed it. I did a whole show on that. And now let me bring this back around to the systemic racism that is built within our financial system. Because in that whole chain timeline that I just explained to you, Black and brown people have been excluded. So also keep that in the context of history, all right? Because that's very important when you're talking about why different areas and different races have different economic struggles, because all of this shit has been rolling downhill ever since. And so boomers, with the Bush tax cuts of 2001 and 2003, amplified this this problem. And what they also did was they gave bonus depreciation to the companies. Now, with the 2017 Trump tax cuts that are now made permanent in the second term of his, we saw that for the average American, we had a 3% rate reduction in our taxes. For corporations, they had a 17% tax reduction. Okay, that in itself is fucking retarded. I'm sorry, you're not supposed to say that word now, but I don't mean like that. I mean it like it's asinine. It's fucking stupid. Okay. But then you have on top of it, you have them getting access to accelerated depreciation. Now you have them getting bonus depreciation. And so all of this is adding to their bottom line. Then you put that in the Clinton signing the thing, tying the C-suite executives' salary to the performance of their stock. And then we start seeing the separation between the workers. And all of these little things have slowly, death by 10,000 paper cuts, has started choking out the middle class. Do you guys see what I'm saying? And so I think that it's not that boomers are to blame as much as it is that boomers are the recipient of the fucking warm, creamy center. Like that's where all of the warm, creamy centerness happened to this generation. And out of that comes the arrogance that they somehow deserve it because they're better. And I think that's why it's so easy to hate on boomers. And there was a study that was done, and I can't remember, I read it in one of my shows I researched. It was a game of, they took participants and they said, hey, you're going to play Monopoly, okay? But you're going to roll a dice, whoever gets the highest number, you're going to get double. Okay, so every time you pass go, you collect the normal $200 if that's what it still is, but you get to collect $400. Okay, and every time you get the community chest, you get double the community chest, and so on. So they got double of all of it, and then they played the game through. And of course, inevitably, what happened is the person that kept winning and kept getting double ended up winning the game. And the person that didn't get double, even though they were trying to hold their head above water and were playing the game fairly, what ended up happening is that they lost. But when they interviewed the people after, even though they knew the rules of the game, they knew they were getting double. When they interviewed the people after, they asked them, hey, why do you think you won? And they said, oh, it was skill. I'm just a better player. I make smarter money decisions. No, it wasn't, motherfucker. You know that you got doubled than this other person. But this is where the psychology of money starts separating. Where after a certain threshold, after you make over $75,000 a year, there is a psychological change where, like Graham was saying, where you start to just pull the ladder up behind you. Because at that point, you believe that it hasn't been because you're white. It hasn't been because you were born in the super sweet spot of the generation. It wasn't because you happen to be in a sector that was going to take off that you didn't know at the time that you did it. It was because you simply pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. And the psychology of money continues and runs through every house and runs through every Congress and every fucking White House administration. And then it ends up amplifying. See what I'm saying? And so the arrogance of the boomers, I think, and the arrogance and the ignorance, like I told you, the shrimp on the treadmill and the transgender mice that I talked about at the top of the hour, those things where you cannot be bothered to do the slightest bit of research and you just assume that you're right, the arrogance is just nauseating, right? And so I don't know if I'll stop hating on boomers, but I get that they're recipients, but I don't know. I mean, sometimes they make it really easy to hate on them. They really do. Not all of them, but a good portion, that insist that you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I did it. They can do it. Fuck off. Fuck off. Look at the data. That's not true. So let's go through just some very, very quick things, and I'm going to wrap this up. I know that this is a long topic. I don't even know if anybody's still listening. Got a couple people still on here. So we have in 1982, this is still pre-boomer. Okay? This is the silent and the great generation, is that we see that the SEC Rule 10B-18 starts allowing companies to be able to buy back their stock on the open market. Now, the thing is that it used to be that you sold the stock and now it's my gain and I get to sell it and I own it, and whatever percentage of your stock is on the open market, that's a percentage of ownership, right? But then what this rule did, pre-boomer generation, is this allowed the normalization of buybacks, which became huge in 2008, because any companies who had cash sitting on the side, when their stock price started to drop so low, they started taking all of these massive buybacks, which started to concentrate their positions in the financial industry. And then some of them did get aid from 2008 and then ended up buying back their own stock. And this was the birth of that allowed all of that. This was in 1982. This was pre-boomer. This was silent generation. This had nothing to do with the boomers, but it was exacerbated by the boomers during the 2008 financial crisis. So even though they didn't put it in place, they weren't quick to dismantle it. And so we have local housing politics. This is just ongoing, where I talked about at the top of the hour that once you own a home, you get a beneficial tax base. And then, of course, you don't want maybe them building an apartment complex right next to you. I have a neighborhood, and literally not even a quarter mile away, they have built, you guys, I'm not fucking lying, it's got to be a 5,000 unit fucking complex. It goes for miles and miles and miles into the desert that I used to walk, 3, 4, 5 miles. And if I would have known they were doing that, I absolutely wouldn't have wanted it there, right? But they didn't build it, anyway. You know what? I'm going to sidetrack myself. I'm not going to say it. But the point is that so you have this tenure of the people who own homes saying, no, we don't want you to rezone. We don't want you to give out a lot of permits, which is expanding the housing crunch, which is hurting the younger generations, because we know that the primary asset that creates wealth for generational wealth is the home first, and then it's the 401k, not pensions, okay, 401k. And so then we saw in 2017, where this was the first round of the Trump tax cuts, 35 to 21% for corporate. We see some changes going back and forth through the child tax credit. And then we see this psychology coming in of, like I told you about the psychology of money, but this identity where the boomer generation, like Xers, right? We identify ourselves as always being forgotten, right? We're always the forgotten generation. Nobody cares about us and we're fine. We'll take care of ourselves. That's our identity, right? We were latchkey kids. That's what we did. The boomer generation, there's this thing of, I deserved this. You guys are lazy. That's why you can't get it. So I'm going to protect my generational identity by saying that, I worked harder than you and you eat too much avocado toast. Therefore, this is why you can't afford a home. And there's a whole bunch of other ones here, but I'm going to stop because I'm getting long-winded, and I don't mean to get long-winded. So that is the show. Let me just check chat real quick. 28 minutes. Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. So Beyond the Bar checked, and he says that the the federal tax estate exclusion is 14 million and 28. Okay. Actually, I don't really understand the comment. Looks like it's 28 million exemption on estate tax. That seems extremely high for me. Anyway, the point is that there is federal, and it could have changed. I have no fucking idea. I'm not an estate attorney. But there is state laws estate laws in that get people so that they do not have to, they get an exclusion on some of their stuff. Let's see. Graham says, not confused here. I've been watching the debacle for years. Thanks, Dad, for making me too aware. But I love that. I love that you guys come to my show, that you tune in, that you listen on my podcast, because there's a lot of topics that I cover that I've never heard of before. I've never experienced before. I don't know how they tie into anything, but I research them anyway, and it challenges the way I think. And I love the fact that even though it challenges how you guys might think, you're still here for it. And that makes me, very happy. Okay. So Beyond the Bar, thank you. He clarified. So 14 million for single, and 28 million estate exemption for married couple. So anyway, that's from he went to perplexity.ai. And like I said, I'm not an estate attorney. I have no idea what the limits are, but listeners to the show are smart and educated. Hey CPL, what's going on? I'm getting ready to go. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So CPL is coming to Vegas. Hell yeah. Let me know. I will hit me up through Finances, the other F word, on Instagram, and we'll exchange numbers and we'll make that shit happen. So there you go. The question remains, are boomers really to blame? I mean, no, but yeah. As we continue to do the show, we'll talk more about hoaxes like, shrimp on underwater treadmills and, transgender mice and all of that other stuff. And we'll just uncover more things. If you guys have anything you want me to research, please let me know. And please don't forget my free budget boot camp. I should have talked about this at the top of the hour. For those of you who want to know how to budget, if you go to freebudgetbootcamp.com, I do a free budget boot camp on the third Monday of every month where we talk about budgeting, but we talk about it within a financial planning context. It's not general rule of thumb bullshit. It's like legitimately how to move the needle on your finances using budgeting in a financial planning context, not just numbers, right? And so if you are interested in that, you can go to freebudgetbootcamp.com and you can register, and it is completely free. Hopefully I will see you there. Either way, it's the third Monday of every month. And I appreciate you guys for hanging out with me. And with that, station head and Finances, the other F word, I am out this bitch.
Thanks for listening. Please like, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.